Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Morning Musings. I'm back. Boy, I tell you what, we had a round of weather here in Ardmore. Now, look, okay, before I get into this, I know full well that all of you folks living up in the north, whether it's Canada, even Alaska, uh, I know that what I'm about to share will be a good laugh for you. All right? Um, but last week, I was off the air. Some of you noticed. But anyway, we had a round of weather, the like of which we have not had in Ardmore, Oklahoma for 20 years. Now, I've got to explain this, okay? Um, Ardmore sits immediately south of what they call the Arbuckle Mountains. Now, they're not mountains, they're bumps. But nonetheless, they call them the Arbuckle Mountains. And any front coming from the north is generally deflected, and it goes around Ardmore. Immediately to the south of us is the Red River. Well, guess what? Any front coming from the south is generally deflected by the Red River. And so for literally years, for 20 years, Ardmore has not had enough of a snow to even register. I mean, we've had a little dusting here and there, and that's it, all right? But we got around 6 inches. And to compound that, we had like 7, 8, 9 degree below zero weather. And again, for Ardmore, that's almost unheard of. Now, again, I know that those of you who live up in the nether regions, like, Nebraska, my webmaster, Alan Morton, he lives in Nebraska. At the time we were having 8 degrees below zero, they had 30 degrees below zero. And my response to that is, no, I'm not ever moving north. Look, I'm not a cold weather person. Anything below 50 degrees is too cold for me. I just don't like it. Then I was speaking to my good friend Holger Neubauer from Michigan on the phone. And I was mentioning, 8 degrees below zero when we had 6 or 7 inches of snow. And he just kind of chuckled. And I said, yes, I know that for you folks up in Michigan, that this really is laughable. But I said, here in Ardmore, it closes the city down. Now, look, I used to drive a truck. I've never personally been stuck in ice and snow. I had a bunch of firewood in the back of my pickup. I honored my wife's request. I'm going to blame it on her. Okay, so I didn't get out. Uh, Technically, I probably could have come to the office, but again, I honored her request, and I didn't get out. So for a week, I was sequestered at the house, hugging my fireplace and enjoying it every minute of the time. So you have to understand what was going on last week. It was, for Ardmore, it was a time of really, really, really bitter weather. And I know, obviously, that record making almost, we had 14 degrees below zero for 2 weeks about 20 years ago. So I know that this record cold weather is probably due to climate warming. Whatever. Sorry, couldn't help myself. But it is highly unusual for us. And again, our whole town, we basically shut down when it gets like this. So, nonetheless, I'm back. I'm glad to be back. Although I managed to get some writing done, although I managed to get some reading done while locked up in the house, I tell you, it's good to be back and to be back with you here on Morning Musings. I hope that you have been safe during all of this bitterly cold weather. I hope that all of you who live in Texas were not subjected to that awful, awful situation. Thankfully, they're getting that turned around. Okay, back to our discussion of the Olivet Discourse. We are focused on Matthew 25, 1 to 13, and the question of whether or not the Olivet Discourse discusses two things. Number one, the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, which the Lord described as his coming on the clouds with power and great glory, and then his coming on the clouds with power and great glory at the supposed end of time. The standard majority view is that in Matthew 24:36, Jesus said, or Jesus changed the subject from a discussion of AD 70 to the end of the world. Now, it doesn't say that, and it doesn't indicate that, and it especially doesn't say that when we honor the Jewish festal references of Matthew 24 and verse 36. Verse 36. But go back and watch those videos, okay? So, what I've been doing is sharing with you, pardon me, that this motif of the coming of the Lord for the wedding is taken right straight out of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel. The theme, pardon me, the theme of the last days remarriage of the Lord with Israel, the whole house of Israel, permeates the Old Covenant. Now, we've come down to Isaiah chapter 66. And I've been sharing with you some incredible things from Isaiah chapter 66. And what I'm going to be doing today is a little bit of reiteration, but since I've been gone so long, I think it's important. Okay, Isaiah 66 begins with a discussion of the coming destruction of Jerusalem. Now keep in mind, Isaiah 66 was written after the fall of Jerusalem in 586 BC. And yet, it foretold another final desolation of the temple and the city that would be the coming of that which they would dread, that which they feared. And yet, in the midst of all of this bad news, the Lord made a promise. Verse 12. And for time's sake, I'm skipping over some text here, obviously. Behold, I will extend peace to her, that's Jerusalem. Oh, wait a minute. This is Jerusalem. He just predicted the destruction of the city and the temple. So is he talking about the restoration of the literal physical city, the literal physical temple? No, we've already seen how that cannot be true, because Stephen, in quoting this passage, said God does not dwell in temples made with hands, and that the time was coming in which when a man would offer an animal sacrifice, for instance of a bull, it would be the same as if he killed a man. Animal sacrifices would become an abomination to God in the time that was coming. Okay, so this is not talking about the restoration of literal physical Zion or a literal physical temple. But nonetheless, I will extend peace to her like a river, and the glory of the Gentiles like a flowing stream. Then you shall feed, on her side shall you be carried, and be dandled on her knees, as one whom his mother comforts. So I will comfort you, and you shall be comforted in Zion. Now look, folks, I've said this before. Let me say this again. When we see these Old Testament prophecies of the last days restoration of Israel, the last days restoration specifically of Zion and Jerusalem, we have to realize that these are prophecies of the restoration of all 12 tribes. Because you see, the 10 northern tribes were carried off into Assyrian captivity in 721 BC. The 2 southern tribes were carried off into Babylonian captivity in BC 586. But when the 10 northern tribes were carried off, Zion, Jerusalem, was not carried into captivity at all. In Isaiah 30 to 37, here come the Assyrians. Yes, they come into the land of Israel. They capture and destroy 46 cities. But they come before the walls of Jerusalem, and they think they're going to do the same to the city of Jerusalem. But the Lord delivers them by having the angel of the Lord go through the camp of the Assyrians and killed 186,000 of them. And according to Isaiah chapter 37, Sennacherib went back to Assyria, and there, as he was worshiping his idolatrous god, his own sons killed him, took his place. But the point is, Jerusalem was delivered. So when we find predictions of the restoration of Jerusalem, it's not talking about the restoration of just the 2 tribes, and it's not talking about the restoration of the 10 tribes. It is talking about a time subsequent to Assyrian captivity, subsequent to Babylonian captivity, when the whole house of Israel, all 12 tribes, would be restored under that heading of the restoration of Zion. But here's where we're going with this. In addition to extending peace to, quote, Jerusalem and Zion, the Lord says the glory of the Gentiles will be like a flowing stream to you. See, here's the restoration of all 12 tribes under the heading of the restoration of Zion. But in addition to that, the blessings of and the salvation of and the glorification of the Gentiles. The Gentiles are not and are never referred to as Zion. Never. And thus, restoration of all 12 tribes, the salvation of the Gentiles. This is what has been called the universalization of the gospel of Christ. Torah was for Israel, although Gentiles could become a part of it. That's evident. That's undeniable. But the time was coming, at the time of the restoration of Israel, the restoration of Zion, in which the nations of the world, no matter what ethnicity, no matter what nation, no matter whatever, they can come into Israel's salvation. Thanks be to God for that. All right? Hey, don't forget my February special of 3 books, One Root, One Kingdom, All People, which discusses this at length, by the way, and Like Father, Like Son on Clouds of Glory, and then a free copy of Gene Fadley's great little book. He passed away a few years ago. He's a great guy, great Bible student. Hebrews, Covenants in Contrast, thrown in free of charge. Now look, if you purchased all 3 of those books and paid shipping, it would cost you a good bit, all right? For February 2021, U.S. orders only, total delivered price, $35. There's a wonderful banner at the top of my website page, www.donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com. Go there, take advantage of the February special. You know, here we are, time's already running out. Order it today. You'll be glad you did. Hey, I'll see you on the flip side.